Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, A Secure Multi-Cloud Approach in Government, sponsored by Equinix Government Solutions on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today, Doug Casa, the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency, Greg Smithberger, the Director of Capabilities and Chief Information Officer at the National Security Agency, and David Peed, the Vice President and General Manager of Equinix Government Solutions. Before break, we were talking about the multi-cloud and hybrid cloud approach that we're seeing. Let me turn to Doug to lead us off. And there's a challenge when you get into this hybrid environment of applications and data and how to ensure that everyone, the right people, have the right access at the right times. And as you said, you guys have more than 1 million kind of customer users and they're around the world. So how do you find that right balance when you're in this hybrid cloud approach to ensuring that data and applications are working well and people have access to the right place and the right time?
Yeah, and so we've certainly seen our role in security change over time to where once we had owned all IT, now we're kind of a broker of sorts, right? To where we're consulting on what's best to transition, but also from the security perspective as well. And starting with that comes with understanding what we're even managing. And that's what I mean by broker, right? We're not only helping transition, but we're helping to understand what's out there right now. And as we've increased our transition to cloud services, whether it's multi or hybrid, we've had an increased need for security. And that comes with the new functions of continuous monitoring and auditing, which have really ramped up. And we're really doing that in 3 areas. And the first and foremost is identities management, right? So access controls, making sure the people that need to see the data have the access rights to see and manipulate and share that data. The second, of course, is encryption, which helps us create the security boundaries. And then the third, which is multi-factor authentication for how you get access to even the systems itself, let alone the data. We've really ramped up in all 3 areas. And that's been a partnership with our vendors as well. As we're transitioning applications into the cloud, we are relying on them to help with some of those custom configurations for the applications, which many differ as we transition those.
Do you have any concern or challenges around, okay, if you have the data on one on-premise, right, but someone needs it, and the best way to get it to them is through maybe a cloud service, but it's a limited amount of time, or it's just, well, we have this operation, and wow, they really need this database or this access to this type of application. Is there a way to move in between the 2 clouds? The security side, put that off to the side just for half a second, but are you guys able to do that, or is that still a big challenge?
We are, and there have been pros and cons to that, right? So the pros is that we can do it very quickly when we need to. The con is that a lot of our users don't understand their dependencies on the clouds that we have offered, right? So they don't actually see how those investments have paid off. I mean, that's really a pro in the end, because it all should be seamless to the user, and that's our main goal in all of this. And
part of that is understanding what you have.
Right.
So imagine you have you've done some sort of assessment or some sort of inventory, for lack of a better word.
Yep, and that changes every day.
Sure.
And as our inventory changes, or as the configurations change, security plays back into it, that we have to have continuous monitoring of. It's not just the users, it's also the applications.
Greg, weigh in too. How is NSA kind of dealing with that same balance?
So in addition to all the things that Doug talked about, this problem of controlling need to know while still taking advantage of big data analytics and AI and machine learning was at the heart of the design of the IC Gov Cloud from the beginning. So if you look at most of the commercial offerings that involve big data lakes and big data analytics running on top of them, the underlying assumption is that everyone who has access to the lake is allowed to see all the data in the lake, right? It's credit card transactions from all of your customers, something along those lines. In the intelligence world, that's just not the case. We have lots of different data from different sources, and people only have a need to know certain parts of that. So at the very core of the Gov Cloud is a system that tags all the data, where there's a very elaborate system for determining what the humans are authorized to see. And the machines can crawl all over the data, but they only serve up to the humans precisely what they're authorized to see and no more. So a key part of the data movement issue is, what is it that the people really need to answer the questions that they're trying to answer, or to inform the judgments they're trying to make? In many cases, they really don't want to see all the raw data. It's overwhelming and they can't process it fast enough. What they need are the key insights, or the subset of the data that's most relevant for the problem they're trying to work on. And moving that across the network at great speed is a lot easier than trying to move a mountain of data. right?
I would add to what Greg is saying. I absolutely agree, and I would say that's our biggest opportunity with our commercial providers is helping with that data-centric security strategy.
I think what you both are describing is that move to zero trust, and I know the NSA. I've talked to some of your colleagues at NSA over the years, and you guys are definitely out in front. I know you guys are working with DISA also on the zero trust piece. But is that the underlying really goal in many ways? Is the roles, responsibilities, attribute control? That's whether it's cloud or not cloud.
Right.
That's your end goal.
Attribute-based access control down to the individual data element level.
Yeah.
Where, essentially zero trust before zero trust was cool.
It is cool now. So, welcome to now you guys are on the bandwagon. David, jump in.
Yeah. No, I think that there's sayings at Equinix is there's more happens at Equinix than is done by Equinix, in a sense. We're the platform that many of these architectures are built, and I think my 30-some years and being on this side of the table from the government's, being a government contractor, seeing that a lot of times in my mind, network security and cybersecurity are extremely important. People lose sight of the physical security and the human element of what security means, and a lot of times it's a bad actor who is running out a bad mission is the biggest sense of vulnerability. And the other thing I think really important is, it comes from the top down. Our CEO, Charles Myers, is 120% behind the government business. He's met with several of our customers, and I think, what I've learned in the last 25 or 30 years is folks like Doug and Greg, they want to sit across the table from the commercial providers and feel a level of trust and honesty, and I think we bring that to the table.
Talk a little bit about that a little bit more in the sense of security is a shared responsibility. It's never just the government. It's never just the industry partner. Talk how that kind of evolution has happened over the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, and I think it's just whether it's on network security, on building networks, on any way. I think when you truly get in a government partnership where you're collaborating on what's happening in the market. Many times when the executives come in from Equinix to visit customers, they want me to say, okay, well, how do you want to script this to talk to the government? I'm like, no, talk to the government from your view of the world that you see, that's what's going on globally, because many times in the government sector we get stuck in our bubble, and I think the customers and the agencies really want is an open dialogue about what's happening across the globe. And I think that the collaboration is the key element of I think anything, whether it's security or whatever you're trying to accomplish with the government. If you can get that collaborative approach where you're both learning lessons, it's a win-win.
Did you get a sense of how much of the security responsibility is on the vendor side versus on the government side? I mean, much is maybe not the right word, but how do you ensure that collaboration? Like, what's a conversation like when you talk to your government customers? Are they asking you, okay, what are your security? Did you meet FISMA High? How many of the controls do you have? Or is the conversation, here's what we think we can do, here's what you can do, how do we bring it all together?
Yeah, it's very collaborative, and whether it was 50-50, 60-40, certainly I think the government probably plays a stronger role into defining where they want to go to and where they want to be. But us as a provider, I think we hold a lot of the responsibility for the pieces that we control, and I think that's what their expectations are of us.
Greg, jump in.
So it's always a government industry partnership, but there's sort of a sliding scale. If we're talking about government applications that are at the unclassified level, there's a heavier reliance upon the vendor. As we move toward the secret and the top secret world, there's a much heavier government role, particularly in providing the outer boundary of security, making sure that our classified networks stay separate from the outside world. Clearly the consequences of a breach, the consequences of even an insider problem, are much greater at a top secret level than an unclassified level. So there are additional layers of insider threat monitoring, and even some areas where the government entities will choose to do things over and above what the contractors are doing, or even overseeing for example, overseeing the cloud service provider in a classified context to make sure that they're doing exactly what is expected and no more, and that the government data continues to be protected in the way we expect. So the answers are really different. It's sort of a sliding scale from unclassified to top secret.
There's one thing that when I talk to cloud providers, they seem to say, well, our security is probably better than the government's. And let's just take it at the unclassified level for a second. Do you find that you are, from NSA or even DIA's perspective, are you relying on the vendors to provide a certain level of security at the unclassified level more and more? Or again, is it still, whether it's 50-50 or 40-60 or 60-40, it's still, the burden is still heavy on both sides?
So I can say certainly for NSA, it's our responsibility to ensure that our data is protected. And there are specific outcomes that we're looking for with regard to protection against insider and external threats that we enforce even at the unclassified level. Now, we'll more aggressively leverage the native capabilities that the industry partners are providing at the unclassified level, as long as we can achieve our outcomes and we can verify independently that we're achieving our outcomes. We're more comfortable with that. At the higher levels of classification, we'll wrap more government-specific things around that.
Yeah,
good.
I would agree with Greg on that. Then there are a couple other aspects to this that we have to consider, particularly intelligence agencies. Our operations do demand some additional security considerations that we don't get from industry necessarily, like operating in a completely disconnected environment, right, where we're transitioning between one network and another. Another being having our equipment being able to survive a nuclear blast, for example, right? So we actually have requirements that define capabilities that we uniquely have to offer. But the other side of this is also on the user perspective. I mentioned in the beginning we support millions of users around the world, as Greg and other IC elements. And there's a user security aspect to this, to where you get the policies, the governance, the legal authorities of that data, right? So there's a sharing aspect to where just because it's shared doesn't mean, if you're a law enforcement element, you can use it in a certain way versus an IC element. So that plays into it as well.
I think the short answer, though, is we want to capitalize on all the best ideas that industry has, and we want to bring other ideas to bear. That's one of the things that makes NSA unique is we are a forward intelligence agency that specializes in not only protecting communications and networks, but also in extracting intelligence from communications and networks. So we have a lot of unique expertise in terms of what the vulnerabilities are and how to practically get in the way of people who are trying to exploit networks. And we bring that to the conversation with our industry partners to try to find the best combination of solutions. They push us, we push them, but we want everything they can bring to bear, as well as the other things we feel compelled to bring.
And NSA has always been known, at least over the last maybe 20, 25 years, maybe even a little longer, as taking some of that industry best practices, helping industry get better, and then sharing that out. I mean, for the old joke of you guys didn't exist, you guys have done a pretty good job of existing in certain markets, right? David, let me ask you, when it comes to this idea of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud approach, does the security become more difficult? Does that change your perspective of security in any way?
Not really. I mean, I think, from our perspective, having everything in a centralized location. So if you're taking one of our data centers, as long as you're protecting that location and whatever level of classification is warranted by the government, then I think, no. So that I don't think that the hibernate. In fact, I think it maybe has a potential to control the environment a little more, because you do have things that are consolidated, and you're connecting into only the folks who want you interconnected with them. And as long as we can partner with the government on how we control that environment from the physical perspective, and again, we don't do a lot on the network perspective from controlling the information or their information at all. We provide security for the infrastructure that we provide. I don't think to me, I think it actually, having things in one location probably helps control the environment more. And as long as that area that you're protecting is controlled, I think is better off.
And we've seen that across the government in this move to consolidate data centers. It's the old idea of the less footprint, and you don't have to worry about trying to secure 100 different places, you can really focus on 20 or 5 or however many the number is. So I think that's been an industry best practice for the last few years, though then people always will tell you, well, but then you have the bad actors have less places to attack. So
yeah, and I think
it's always that balance.
But to that point, and I think also with the bombing, everything in today's world seems to be interconnected. I mean, not many agencies are, I think, taking a singular approach as to where they store their data and control their data, and so much is replicated and interconnected that. That just adds a level of complexity, but I think it takes away some of the concerns from, a catastrophic event where, in most instances, I think a lot of the data that they're responsible for is replicated and accessible from other locations.
I want to go back to one thing that Doug said early on in this segment about the continuous monitoring, the auditing side, and then you looked at access controls, encryption, multi-factor authentication. The access control piece, Doug, maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, because I think when it comes to the cloud, that's the missing piece. Can an agency or can a company provide you with that cross functionality between, okay, on-premise it's one thing, in the cloud it's one thing, but what about when it's the hybrid?
Yeah, and it really points back to consistency across multiple layers, right? So to enable to enforce that, we need consistency within our own agency and a consistency across agency. And I would say one factor that's really led to our success in our migration to cloud, especially within the intelligence community, has been this consistency across the agencies of working together. Where in the old days, we went off and did our own things. Now we're actually looking at this as a consolidated strategy. And when I say consistency, it's really across the development environments where we develop our applications and deploy them to the cloud. It's the accreditation standards that we can share and now have reciprocity across. It's the consistency in the tools that we're using. So a number of factors play into it, but instead of doing it as just one agency now, we're really sharing that across the community.
It's amazing when just a little bit of standards can help. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can talk more about AI, machine learning, and some of the benefits of moving to this hybrid or multi-cloud approach. You're listening to the panel discussion, A Secure Multi-Cloud Approach in Government, sponsored by Equinix Government Solutions on Federal News Network.